This video is in a 360-degree format. Look around, rotate the image with your finger or turn the phone, and immerse yourself in the atmosphere of the Eternal City together with me. The sound here is also special, so if you put on headphones, you will hear the city exactly as I hear it. We are standing at Porta Maggiore Square. Today, it is a noisy transport junction where trams thunder and thousands of cars pass. But 2,000 years ago, there stood an engineering triumph of the empire. These gigantic gates originally were not gates at all, but a bridge. A giant intersection of two aqueducts, Aqua Claudia and Anio Novus. Look at these rough, unfinished stones. This style is called rustication. Emperor Claudius deliberately left them this way to emphasize the power and primal nature of the stone. Right above our heads, in the upper tiers of the arches, tons of water once flowed, supplying the arid Rome. Later in the 3rd century, Emperor Aurelian simply embedded this technical node into his famous wall, turning it into a monumental entrance to the city. But the strangest thing here is not the gates. Look at this unusual building right at the foot of the arches. This is the tomb of Marcus Virgilius Eurysaces. Who was he? A great general? No, he was a baker. A former slave who grew rich built himself a mausoleum in the shape of a huge bread oven. Look at these round openings in the walls. They imitate vessels for kneading dough. Eurysaces was so proud of his trade that even on the reliefs, he ordered the entire process of bread baking depicted. This is the best monument to the Roman dream in history. However, the main secret is hidden deep beneath our feet. At the beginning of the 20th century, literally under the tram tracks, an underground basilica was discovered by chance. This is a unique Neo-Pythagorean temple of the 1st century, hidden from the eyes of emperors. The walls there are covered with the finest stucco, depicting mystical rituals. The temple is so enigmatic that scholars still argue who and why prayed in this silence, while above chariots thundered. Porta Maggiore is a place where time does not simply pass, but layers itself, acquiring the form of immortality. Immediately beyond the ancient walls stands one of the strangest structures in this area, a water tower created by architect Raffaele de Vico. Look how skillfully he turned a purely technical structure into a real castle of brick and concrete. De Vico was a master of harmony. He combined the power of ancient forms with the aesthetics of the 20th century. Rotate the image to appreciate its scale. Inside this reservoir is hidden not just water, but true poetry of engineering thought. Only 150 meters from the water tower stands Santa Croce in Gerusalemme. If Porta Maggiore is a triumph of engineering, then this place is a triumph of the will of one woman. In the 4th century, Saint Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, effectively expropriated the main relics of Jerusalem and transported them to her private residence, the Caesarium Palace. This temple did not emerge from nothing. It grew directly inside Helena's private chambers. She was not merely building a church. She was creating a space for storing her spoils. Fragments of the life-giving cross, the crown of thorns, and the titulus from the crucifixion. Even the ground beneath our feet in the chapel of St. Helena is imported. It was shipped by sea from Golgotha so that Palestinian soil would become the foundation of Roman faith. The facade you see now is a polished work by architects Domenico Gregorini and Pietro Passalacqua. In the mid-18th century, they wrapped the ancient palace skeleton in refined Baroque. This is architectural camouflage. Behind the soft lines of Rococo hide harsh granite columns of an antique building. Here, the history of Rome finally loses linearity. An imperial villa becomes a repository of artifacts, and Helena's private property turns into one of the world's main pilgrimage centers. This is a place where material evidence of the past was literally walled in stone to manufacture a new reality. As we drive toward Laterano, look at this Jubilee gloss. Rome was brought into shape by 2025, a condition it had not known for decades. We will pass the greatest monuments of antiquity and modern architecture, now gleaming with freshly washed travertine. But even through this ideal facade of a clean city, its true nature shows through. This is not a pink guidebook, because behind every perfect cornice and every triumphal arch stands not only genius, but also the colossal stubbornness of this city. We will look at architecture as a battle of ambitions, of emperors who built for eternity, and popes who reshaped the city for themselves. Today, Rome is clean and ceremonial, but we will see it not as scenery, but as a living mechanism that somehow manages to remain majestic, even under the pressure of modern traffic and everyday disorder. Forget the Vatican for a moment. We are standing by the most ancient and most important cathedral of the Western world, the Lateran Basilica. The inscription on its facade reads, "Mother and head of all churches of the city and the world." For 1,000 years, the popes lived here, before moving behind the Vatican walls. Look at the roof. These enormous 7-meter statues of saints against the sky look unsettlingly powerful. But the real story is in the doors. The central entrance is adorned with those very bronze doors that once stood in the Curia on the Roman Forum. And to the right is the Holy Door, opened only once every 25 years. Inside, the cathedral overwhelms. 12 gigantic apostles in niches appear alive. This is a masterpiece of the Baroque era, created by students of Bernini. Directly opposite the cathedral, in a separate building, hides one of the most revered places in Christianity, the Holy Stairs. Tradition says that it was on these steps that Jesus ascended to judgment before Pontius Pilate. They were brought from Jerusalem by Saint Helena. Today, pilgrims ascend along these 28 steps only on their knees. Wooden walkways protect the ancient marble, but through special openings one can see stains of blood, left according to legend by Christ himself. Let us go around the cathedral from behind. Here, the tallest and oldest Egyptian obelisk in the world awaits us. It was brought from the temple of Amun in Thebes. It is more than 3,500 years old. Imagine it stood under the sun of Egypt, even before Rome appeared on any maps at all. Nearby stands the Lateran Baptistery, the first official baptistery in history. which became the model for all similar buildings in Europe. Lateran is the place where the history of Rome stops being pagan and becomes imperial and Christian. This is power that is felt physically. Look at this scale once more before we move on. Right after the frozen grandeur of the cathedrals, we head to Piazza Vittorio. I want to show you this sharp, almost tangible contrast. How the silence of sacred places is shattered by the noisy rhythm of modern reality. This is the best way to feel real Rome, which is not limited to the gold of altars, but lives, boils, and changes right before our eyes. Look at these facades. Huge, pompous buildings with high ceilings and massive porticos. At the end of the 19th century, this district was built as Rome's answer to Paris, as an elite nest for high officials and aristocracy. But dreams of a new Rome were broken by reality. The elite never moved in, judging the area too noisy and the proximity to Termini Station a dubious neighborhood. In the end, luxurious halls were cut into cells. Today, this is a stomach district digesting waves of migration. Instead of carriages, there are parked vans of traders from the Celestial Empire. And instead of polite conversation, a mix of dialects fills the air. The gilding has fallen away, giving place to mold and layers of cheap notices. This place is a perfect illustration of how quickly Rome can turn imperial pathos into a ghetto. These buildings still stand with heads held high, but inside they have long been gutted and filled with a life that is infinitely far from the plans of the architects. We are at Piazza Vittorio Emanuele II, the largest square in Rome, which was meant to become a symbol of the unification of Italy. Today it has become a symbol of its greatest migration crisis. Here, Imperial Rome finally capitulated to reality. Each bench holds its own enclave. African groups dividing territory for hours, Pakistanis ripping open bundles of junk, and marginals whose limit of dreaming is a patch of shade. This is the true face of the district of contrasts. Luxurious arcades choking on the ambitions of the Italian elite of the past have turned into a shelter and a warehouse for everyone who drifted here in search of a better life. Among ancient ruins of Maria's trophies in the center of the park, you now more often see people sleeping on cardboard, homeless, and illegals than strolling aristocrats. This is the Rome that did not make it into the frame of Roman holiday. Piazza Vittorio is the Babylon of our time. This is a place where the great architecture of the 19th century finally lost to the pressure of globalization and poverty. We leave the chaos of Vittorio toward one of the four main basilicas of the world, Santa Maria Maggiore. Legend says that in the 4th century here, at the peak of Roman summer heat, snow suddenly fell, outlining the boundaries of the future temple. Since then, this place is a true vault of Vatican treasures. The ceiling behind this facade is not just paint. It is covered with the first gold brought from America after its discovery by Columbus. The Spanish monarchs gifted it to the Pope so that he would literally overwhelm the heavens of this temple. Beneath this gold, below under the main altar, another relic is hidden. Wooden splinters of the manger in which, according to tradition, the infant Jesus lay. But Rome would not be Rome without irony. While tourists look at the gold and 5th century mosaics, right under their feet, in the floor to the right of the altar, lies a modest slab. Here lies Giovanni Lorenzo Bernini, the man who effectively built Baroque Rome. We exit via Via dell'Esquilino to the square of the same name. Here we are met by yet another Egyptian obelisk. The popes placed them across the city like gigantic navigation markers, so that pilgrims could see the road to the temples from afar. Santa Maria Maggiore is a place where religion turned into pure gold and absolute control over space. A couple of minutes along Via Torino, and the city changes its face again. We burst onto Piazza della Repubblica, a massive semicircle of colonnades that looks like a set from a film about the lives of aristocrats a century ago. But behind this facade hides a far darker story. We stop in the center by the Fountain of the Naiads. Naked bronze nymphs straddle sea monsters under powerful streams of water. When it was unveiled 100 years ago, conservative Rome was shocked by such openness. Now it is just the center of a traffic circle where scooters and buses cut laps around ancient eroticism. For us, this is an ideal point to assess the scale. On one side, luxury hotels. On the other, brick stumps of the great empire. These reddish brick walls are the remains of the baths of Diocletian, the largest bath complex in human history, built on the bones of thousands of Christian slaves. Do you see the strange concave facade right inside the wall of ancient ruins? This is the church of Santa Maria degli Angeli e dei Martiri. Michelangelo simply embedded it into the remains of the baths. We do not go inside, but from the outside it looks unsettling, a sacred place squeezed into an old Roman bath. Instead of modern spas, there were gigantic halls here, where 3,000 people bathed at the same time. The pomp of Piazza della Repubblica literally grew on the ruins of this giant factory of cleanliness. It is too spacious for us here. The city calls us into its narrow cracks. It will get even more interesting ahead. We drive a couple of blocks from Piazza della Repubblica to the corner of Via Tesa Settembre. In front of us is the Fountain of Moses, the first monumental fountain of Rome since antiquity. Pope Sixtus V wanted so badly to supply this district with water that he built it in just a couple of years. And it shows. Look at the central figure. This is Moses, who has just struck the rock with his staff to make the water flow. But the Romans immediately nicknamed him the Ugly Moses because he looks like a steroid bodybuilder who failed basic proportions. Look at the lions below. This is not just decoration. The originals were real Egyptian artifacts from the age of the pharaohs, which the Pope simply took from the Pantheon. Now there are copies here, but the message is clear. Rome has always taken the best from others, and the fountain itself is built from travertine ripped out of the nearby baths of Diocletian. The fountain is officially called Acqua Felice, after the secular name of the Pope, Felice Peretti, happy water. The inscription above is so huge that it takes up a third of the entire structure. The Pope very much wanted everyone who draws water here to remember who they owe this happiness to. Pure public relations at a sacred source. Ahead is flawless Santa Susanna. Behind us is Santa Maria della Vittoria. There is no chaos of Piazza Vittorio here. This is a place where Rome feels assembled and serious. The only thing that reminds you of bustle is the endless growl of engines at the traffic light. But raise your eyes to the facade, and this noise dissolves into monumental calm and travertine. We turn onto Via Sei Settembre, and the atmosphere changes instantly. This is 40 seconds of pure state pomp. On both sides, we are pressed by the mass of ministries. The gigantic Ministry of Economy and Finance, military departments, embassies. Here, Rome does not smile, it governs. Tall facades with heavy cornices create a canyon effect, where every stone emphasizes the status of the new capital of Italy. This is a city of officials, carabinieri, and strict suits, where Baroque gave way to harsh neoclassicism. But this strict corridor leads us to one of the most magical places in Rome. We are approaching the crossroads of four fountains, Quattro Fontane. This is the point where space bends. No matter which way you look, towards Santa Maria Maggiore, the Quirinal, or Piazza di Spagna, everywhere opens an endless perspective of obelisks. Here, on the four corners, in building niches, stand frozen figures of rivers and goddesses. We break out of the gray, bureaucratic canyon into a place where Borromini's architecture meets the genius of Bernini. This is a rare moment when a narrow street suddenly gives you the whole city at once, reminding that even in the most strict government quarter, Rome remains a great open-air theater. We roll out onto the top of the Quirinal Hill. In front of us is the Quirinal Palace, a place where the top of power always sat, whatever it was called. From here, from the Quirinal, Rome opens like a map in your hand. Straight ahead in the distance looms the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. From this point, you understand how power is arranged in this city. At the center of the square is the Dioscuri fountain. Castor and Pollux are giant marble twins who tame the horses. These statues were found in the baths of Constantine and dragged here to underline the power of the new authority. Between them sticks out yet another Egyptian obelisk. It was found near the mausoleum of Augustus. For centuries, Rome was busy with moving ancient artifacts from place to place, assembling new sets for rulers. Two hills, the Vatican and the Quirinal, looked at each other for centuries, deciding who is actually in charge here. We leave the Quirinal behind and slide into the depth of narrow streets to see one of Rome's main pearls. We crawl into these alleys, and the mind refuses to accept the scale of the absurdity. The grand masterpiece of Nicola Salvi, this hymn to ocean and stone, is effectively locked in the backyard of apartment blocks. This is not a ceremonial square. This is a communal dead end where oceanic force was squeezed in. Look up. Someone's kitchen windows open onto Triton's backs. This is all of Rome, a complete lack of sense of measure and distance. They took a palazzo facade and turned it into scenery for a fountain, larger than the building itself. This is a great theatrical production on a tiny stage, a masterpiece that should stand in the middle of a vast plain, crushed between souvenir shops and pizzerias. You drive along this narrow street and realize Trevi is the most beautiful and the most absurd insert in the city's fabric. A massive marble explosion in a cramped courtyard where grandeur and daily life collide head-on. This mass feeds on water from the ancient Aqua Virgo aqueduct, which has been running continuously for more than 2,000 years. Thousands of people stand with their backs to the water, throwing coins over their shoulders. They say this guarantees a return to Rome, but in reality, it guarantees only 1 million euros a year for the local municipality. This is Rinascente, Rome's main shopping center, where the concentration of top brands goes off the scale. If you need something exclusive, you will find it only here. Without waiting for the green light, we move on. Ahead is Piazza di Spagna. We surface from narrow alleys onto one of the most recognizable squares in the world. We are right in front of the column of the Immaculate Conception. This is the apotheosis of religious pathos, rising above the crowd. While the Holy Virgin from the summit stares into emptiness, a very different life boils at the base. Piazza di Spagna long ago ceased to be a place for quiet prayer. Now it is a stage where an army of pushy migrant vendors shoves onto tourists cheap junk, and crowds of gawkers trample history for the sake of a good selfie. On the right is that very Spanish steps, 135 steps that lead to the Church of Trinità dei Monti. At the foot of the steps is the Barcaccia fountain, the work of the father of that very Bernini. It is a half-submerged boat from which water lazily flows out. They say Bernini the Elder was inspired by a flood when the Tiber overflowed and dragged a real boat onto the square. Against the backdrop of Rome's imperial pathos, this fountain looks surprisingly intimate and even cozy. The water here is drinkable, so this is the best place to refill your water supply. If you tilt your head up, above you is another Sallustian obelisk, a Roman imitation of Egypt. And to the left of the steps is Babington's Tea Room, which has stood here for more than 100 years. In this place, there has always been a mix of English snobbery, French architecture, and Italian chaos. Piazza di Spagna stays behind. Ahead is Via del Babuino, a straight road to the People's Square. Piazza del Popolo is not a square, but a giant distribution hub, disguised as a Baroque ensemble. The geometry of the space here follows the logic of a trident. 3 rays of streets, Ripetta, Corso, and Babuino, dig into the square, turning it into a funnel that for centuries sucked in pilgrims and now grinds tourist traffic. This is the highest form of architectural manipulation. Architects Valadier and Rinaldi created symmetry where it did not originally exist. Look at the twin churches, Santa Maria dei Miracoli and Santa Maria in Monte Santo. This is a technical illusion. The plots of land beneath them were different in size and shape, but their facades were designed to deceive the eye. Different dome widths and wall angles are neutralized so that you believe in perfect order, which does not exist. This is architectural software running on 17th century hardware. At the center is the Flaminio obelisk. 3,000 years ago, it stood in Heliopolis, then in the Circus Maximus, and now it is just a vertical axis around which modern Rome rotates. Its role here is purely technical. It works as a visual anchor point, stabilizing the square's visual chaos. On the right is the slope of the Pincian Hill. This is not just a park, but a multi-level engineering terrace, designed by Valadier to retain the soil. But even here, amid this calibrated strictness and neoclassicism, behind flawless balustrades, the same problems are hidden. Exhaust fumes, the growing roar of the crowd, and the eternal dust from repairs. Piazza del Popolo is the triumph of planning over chaos, which nevertheless loses the battle with time every second. We roll on. This is only half the route. The road leads us to Piazza Mazzini, a huge circle, which became the center of a strict and prestigious district. The square bears the name of Giuseppe Mazzini, the chief ideologue of national unification, whose philosophy defined the strict spirit of these quarters. This is the heart of a district, which was built as a symbol of the new Italy. Construction began after 1870, and it was a purely political project to create a secular center as a counterweight to the Papal Vatican. The layout was so radical that the streets were deliberately laid out in a way so that the dome of St. Peter would not dominate the skyline. We cross the Tiber and leave Baroque Rome behind. We are in one of the most respectable districts of Rome, Prati. We are interested in the fountain garden at the center of the square. Architect Raffaele de Vico designed it in the 1930s. Here, imperial pomp gave way to rationalism of the early last century. This is a district of old money. Luxury here is concealed. Behind heavy doors with brass handles hide vast apartments with antiques, libraries, and silver tableware, passed down by inheritance. Prati is respectable quiet and confidence in tomorrow. This is a place for those who have nothing to prove, because their status is obvious by default. Around the square stand imposing buildings. One of them is the headquarters of RAI, Italy's state television. Here, architecture speaks of stability and control. The facades lack excess. Everything obeys the rhythm of windows and straight lines. After the crooked alleys of the center, here you feel the scale of a modern city that has stopped looking back at antiquity. Prati began with heavy Umbertino imperial pomp. These are the surroundings of the Palace of Justice, Piazza Cavour. There, heaviness, Atlantes, Baroque on steroids, and tons of decor. This was an attempt to outshout the Vatican with its own methods, with luxury. But its true form was found here, on Piazza Mazzini. This is architecture that outgrew the need for ornamentation. After the crooked spit stained alleys of the center, here you feel the scale of a city that no longer looks back at antiquity, but dictates the rules of the future. I came here for the cold, quiet of success, but reality made its own adjustments. Today, Piazza Mazzini has turned into a circus. A cheap fair with its plastic stalls and bustle has literally trashed the geometry of Raffaele de Vico. Where there should be purity of form and scale, there is now chaos of stalls. This is a vivid example of how everyday nonsense can temporarily drown out the triumphant voice of architecture, not allowing you to fully feel the status of this place. Right now, I see no reason to linger here. We leave the square. The caryatids are waiting. Prati became the first district of Rome that was designed with regard to all technological advances of the late 19th century. While the city center was choking in medieval crowding and stench, here they laid out the widest avenues with modern sewer systems and, most importantly, electric lighting. Living here in the 1900s meant literally stepping out of the shadow of the past into a bright future. It was a leap into the 21st century, while the rest of Rome was still wearing ancient rags. Prati is Rione 22, the last of the officially recognized historic districts of Rome. It was separated into its own district only in 1921. Its creation put a final point in the formation of the city. This is Rome's final chord. There was nothing left to build and no reason to. Everything created after Prati was only an attempt to repeat its scale. Look at the street names. Cola di Rienzo, Vittorio Colonna, Fabio Massimo. These are not just names. This is a pantheon of triumphators. Walking through Prati, you walk across a map of Italian pride. There are no names of holy martyrs here, only the names of warriors, jurists, and kings. Investments in Prati in the early 20th century were comparable to the budgets of entire European states. The company Società Generale Immobiliare turned this swamp. There used to be flooded meadows here, Prati, into the most expensive piece of concrete in Europe. It was the speculation of the century, and it succeeded. The price per square meter here has always grown despite any crises. We drive a couple of blocks from Monumental Mazzini and arrive at Piazza dei Quiriti. This is a cozy, almost domestic space, which in the early 20th century became the stage for a small scandal. At the center of attention, the caryatid fountain. Look at these four figures. The fountain was opened in 1928, and its author, Attilio Selva, depicted the caryatids completely nude. At the time, this caused a storm of outrage. The Catholic Church and conservative society were shocked by such openness. A few steps from the Vatican. They say that because of the protests, the fountain was never officially ceremonially opened, but the caryatids stayed in place, holding a massive bowl above them. Here, they deliberately did not build visible churches, creating a city for the elite of the new state. However, while secular authorities were planning streets so that St. Peter's Dome stayed hidden, the church responded with its own monumental project, the Basilica San Gioacchino in Prati. San Gioacchino is a technical triumph of the Vatican in the heart of secular Prati. Its uniqueness lies in the aluminum dome. In 1898, aluminum cost more than silver, and this was equivalent to using titanium or carbon fiber today. It was a show of force. While the city was built on principles of rationalism, the church brought high-tech and luxury here that even the richest local investors could not afford. The dome inside is pierced with small openings filled with crystal. By day, light passes through them, creating the effect of glowing stars. For the late 19th century, this was an unseen visual special effect of the highest level. Here among pines and plane trees, you can feel the real spirit of Prati. This place perfectly conveys the atmosphere of a Rome that does not try to look like a great museum, but simply lives its life. The sound of water from the caryatid's bowl and birdsong are louder here than engines. A rare pleasure for this city. Our path leads toward Castel Sant'Angelo. Its walls are already on the horizon. Just 5 minutes of driving, and we reach Piazza Pia. This is the main schluze between secular Prati and the Holy Vatican. We are at the epicenter of the largest urban planning project of modern Rome. For the Jubilee of 2025, they decided to attempt the impossible: to remove all traffic chaos into an underground tunnel, to turn this space into a giant pedestrian promenade. This decision follows the old masters: to create a straight visual axis from Castel Sant'Angelo to St. Peter's Basilica. Investments in this project are measured in tens of millions of euros. And this is not just road repair. It is an attempt to return the square its imperial grandeur. We reach the bank of the Tiber. Before us stands a massive cylinder of Castel Sant'Angelo. This building is a true survivor. It has stood here for almost 2,000 years, serving as an imperial mausoleum, a papal residence, a fortress, and even a grim prison. All of Rome in one container, an ancient base with a Renaissance superstructure. In front of the castle stretches the Aelius Bridge, also known as Saint Angel Bridge. These 10 angels on the parapets are the work of Bernini's school. Each holds instruments of Christ's Passion. In morning or sunset light, their figures against the dark stone of the fortress look maximally dramatic. This is an ideal corridor that guides the viewer straight to the massive walls. We head to Piazza Cavour to see the Supreme Court of Rome. Piazza Cavour is the place where the scale of imperial ambitions of the New Italy reaches its peak. At the center of this space rises the Palace of Justice, also known as the Court of Cassation. Architect Guglielmo Calderini created not just a building, but a stone manifesto of power and law. Look at this facade. It literally crushes with its mass. But raise your eyes a bit above these pompous columns, and grandeur cracks into comedy. Look at these walls. Across the entire facade, among ancient scrolls and imperial decor, air conditioners hang in clusters, rusty boxes with tangled pipes and dirty streaks on centuries-old stone. The Supreme Court is a monument to the fact that even the harshest justice in Italy always loses to the desire to sit calmly under a cool breeze from a cheap air conditioner. This carelessness keeps Rome alive. Here, pomp is never final. Behind every grand door, there is an official too lazy to install new engineering systems. So he simply punched a hole into an ancient facade. This colossal travertine structure was built over 22 years, from 1888 to 1910, becoming the most expensive and heaviest construction of the era. The Palace of Justice became a symbol of total corruption even before the first judge entered its halls. Guglielmo Calderini could not withstand the shame and pressure. According to one version, it was precisely the scale of accusations and the realization that his creation had become a synonym for theft that drove him to suicide shortly after the building opened. Look at the base of this colossus. These massive, deliberately rough foundation blocks are rustication. You saw the same technique at Porta Maggiore. There, the rough stone emphasized the power of ancient aqueducts. Here it serves as the foundation for Italy's highest judicial power. This is not just a decorative device, it is an architectural language of force. Architect Calderini deliberately borrows this wild texture from the ancients to show. This palace stands not on sand, but on unshakable bedrock. The rough, rocky base of the building transitions into perfectly polished upper floors, symbolizing the path from primal power to the triumph of civilized law. This is a direct reference to antiquity, but executed with the imperial sweep of the 20th century. Here, the stone does not just support the walls, it transmits unbreakable solidity. To reach Piazza Navona, we leave Prati via Umberto Fuente Bridge, opened in 1895. Named in honor of the then King of Italy, this bridge is not just a crossing of the Tiber, but a monumental podium. It was designed specifically to emphasize the symmetry and crushing power of the Palace of Justice, which remains behind us. Just 900 meters, and we arrive at a place that once was an ancient stadium and has now become the quintessence of Roman Baroque. We are literally standing on the arena of the ancient stadium of Domitian, where 2 millennia ago athletes competed. Now this is the most elegant living room of Rome, under the open sky. We are on Piazza Navona by the Fountain of Neptune. This northern point of the square and its history are a clear example that true greatness requires time. The fountain basin was created back in 1574 by Giacomo della Porta, but for almost 300 years it stood empty and silent. Only in 1878, when Rome became the capital of the New Italy, the fountain gained its present power. At the very center of Piazza Navona stands frozen the main symbol of Baroque triumph, the Fountain of the Four Rivers. Created by the great Bernini in 1651, by order of Pope Innocent X. Look at the church of Sant'Agnese. This is the work of Borromini himself, whose work we already saw at the Quirinal's Four Fountains crossroads. The facade is concave, so the dome appears even higher and more dominant. The entire square ensemble is a dialogue frozen in stone between 2 geniuses who hated each other, yet together built a perfect city. This fountain became an architectural sensation of its time. Bernini did the impossible. He placed a gigantic Egyptian obelisk into emptiness on a hollow travertine rock pierced with grottos. 4 colossal figures symbolize the main rivers of the 4 known continents. The Nile with a covered face since its source was unknown. The Ganges, the Danube, and La Plata. This is a metaphor for the power of Rome and the Catholic Church spread across the entire planet. Today, Piazza Navona has lost the battle for greatness. Christmas stalls, the smell of roasted chestnuts, and endless tourist potalk turned Bernini's Baroque theater into a noisy fair. When architecture of this scale drowns in market bustle, it loses its voice. We hurry to get out without seeing the square to the end. We leave Navona to those ready to trade Bernini's greatness for Christmas fast food and plastic souvenirs. There, beyond the bridge, remain endless avenues. In Prati, architecture is drawn with a ruler to give you air and a sense of control. But once you cross the bridge and move toward the Pantheon, Rome turns into a stone trap. Here, architecture is not ambition, but layered necessity. Streets narrow into corridors. Buildings cling to each other almost physically. And alley chaos chokes the very freedom we just felt on Prati's avenues. One district was built to look into the future, the other to endlessly chew its ruins. The final stroke in this portrait are endless, humiliating fast food lines, now wrapping around the Pantheon tighter than ancient columns. People are ready to stand for hours on narrow sidewalks for a cardboard box of pasta or a slice of pizza, just to tick a box on their achievement list. This is the apotheosis of affordable Rome. Watching a crowd crushed into medieval alleys happily settle for this surrogate of life against eternity is the best proof that Rome's greatness is slowly turning into scenery. Right before the Pantheon's grandeur stands frozen, a fountain on Piazza della Rotonda. Created by Giacomo della Porta in the late 16th century, it long remained a modest basin until Pope Clement XI decided to add weight. In 1711, an Egyptian obelisk of Ramesses II was placed at the center, on a base of dolphins and masks. This fountain is a clear example of how Rome layers meanings. Ancient Egypt, papal Baroque, and the Pantheon's concrete in the background. But today, this harmony is broken. The fountain became a barrier around which chaos boils, ticket lines, camera flashes, and Christmas stalls. The exit from this labyrinth to the Pantheon always catches you off guard. You were just pushing through tourist crowds when suddenly walls part and power hits you. 2,000 years old. This is a collision of two realities. On one side, the squares bustle, packed with tourists, Bangladeshi vendors, and souvenir shops. On the other, absolute heavy silence. Yet no matter how we value silence, before the Pantheon you bow your head. This is architectural absolute. In a world that decays and rebuilds, it has stood for 2 millennia without changing its geometry. Its dome is not just concrete and brick. It is a triumph of engineering that still feels like magic. The vast eye above, the sole light source, turns the building into a giant sundial, linking man directly to the cosmos. Here under this dome, you understand where the roots of that imperial scale we saw in Prati grow. The Pantheon is point zero. It saw the rise and fall of empires. It outlived barbarians and will outlive current pizza lines as well. We pay it respect as the highest point of human craft mastery, the source from which Rome has drawn its strength for 2,000 years. This is greatness that needs no protection. It will itself, for thousands of years, protect this city from oblivion. Just a few steps from the Pantheon Dome, on Piazza Santa Maria sopra Minerva, awaits the city's strangest obelisk. This is the work of Great Bernini, a tiny Egyptian obelisk mounted on the back of a marble elephant. In this gesture lies the whole essence of Baroque. The elephant, a symbol of wisdom and unshakable strength, carries the weight of ancient knowledge. This was Bernini's attempt to show true faith and intellect must rest on a solid foundation. The Romans, though, quickly nicknamed the elephant a chick because of its small size, but this does not diminish its aristocratic nature. Against the crowd storming the Pantheon, this elephant feels like a guardian of silence. It stands with its back to the monastery where Galileo was once tried, as if reminding truth always stands above bustle and temporary stalls. After the rational avenues of Prati, this monument feels like the most refined form of pathos, where power does not shout, but is served with light irony and impeccable taste. We head toward Largo de Torre Argentina, a place where Rome's history literally falls through the ground, exposing its deepest and bloodiest seams. We enter the square, a place where the modern city opens a deep collapse into the past. This is not just an archaeological zone. This is one of the most dramatic crossroads of history. Look down. There, where at a depth of several meters lie frozen the ruins of 4 Republican temples. It was here in the Curia of Pompey's theater that the finale unfolded of the loudest political drama of antiquity. On the Ides of March in 44 BC, here Julius Caesar was killed. A man who held the fate of the world fell by the hands of his allies, right on these stones. The air here is literally soaked with the sense of fleeting power and fatal mistakes. But today, this ancient shadow theater lives a very different life. The masters of the dictator's death site are now those who recognize no laws or empires. Roman cats, the famous shelter settled directly in the ruins, turned a place of slaughter into an oasis of mercy. To see a lazy cat sleep on that very column, past which Caesar may have walked toward his death, is the best history lesson Rome can give. Greatness and ambition went into the ground, and life goes on in its softest and most independent form. Here among ancient stones and furry guardians, you understand. Time is equally merciless to tyrants and kind to those who simply know how to warm in the sun. We move toward Piazza Venezia, and the city again begins to grow in scale. We are on Piazza Ara Coeli. This is a 16th century fountain by Giacomo della Porta, which today looks like forgotten scenery against monumental chaos. It is literally pressed into asphalt. On one side, the mass of the Vittoriano bears down. On the other, a roaring stream of cars and buses. From these bowls once drank the horses of aristocrats, and today float receipts from nearby cafes and plastic lids. On the right drifts by the Capitoline Hill, the cradle of Rome, the place where once stood the Temple of Jupiter. We will return to it later to unpack its layers, but for now, all attention goes to it, the monument to Victor Emmanuel II. This building is a real thunderclap in clear skies of Roman classicism. Blindingly white, colossal, almost excessive. Built at the turn of the century to honor Italy's unification, it literally crushed the medieval fabric of the hill to declare a new greatness. This is the point where Rome finally stops being a cozy labyrinth and becomes an imperial facade. Huge equestrian statues, endless staircases, and the eternal flame at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Everything here screams national triumph. This is a grand curtain behind which the Forum hides, and a perfect backdrop to feel yourself at the very center of Italian history. The Vittoriano is not just a monument, it is a manifesto. When in the late 19th century, Italy finally became one, it needed a symbol able to outshout the greatness of emperors and popes. And the architects did not hold back. They literally cut out a piece of the Capitoline Hill, wiping from the face of the earth medieval quarters and monasteries, to place this snow-white colossus here. Look how it blinds. In a city where everything breathes honey ochre and warm travertine, the Vittoriano feels like an intruder from another world. For now, we simply dissolve into the scale. We turn off the ceremonial routes and begin the ascent to the Capitoline Hill by its back road. This path is like a time portal. With every meter upward, modern Rome with its tourist noise and Christmas queues stays below. And ahead emerge walls that remember Romulus and Remus. The Capitoline, the most sacred of the 7 hills. There was no place for fuss here. There was only power and gods. We are literally moving through epochs. This ascent is a necessary pause. We have just seen the monumental pathos of the Vittoriano, which tried to deafen us. But the Capitoline speaks more quietly and with more weight. We rise toward the square designed by Michelangelo himself, to see Rome not as scenery, but as a city that grew on this rock and bent the world to itself. This is the road to the very heart, to the place where every turn opens a view of the Forum, which still takes the breath away. We are on the summit of the Capitoline. Before us is Piazza del Campidoglio, the first example in history of architecture obeying the human and not the reverse. When Pope Paul III tasked Michelangelo to put this hill in order, it was a chaotic wasteland. The great master turned it into an ideal open-air theatrical hall. Pay attention to the geometry. The square is not rectangular. It has the shape of a trapezoid, which visually expands the space, making us feel more significant. And this famous oval pattern in the paving is the navel of the earth, the point from which invisible rays of Roman influence spread. At the center, the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius, the only ancient bronze to survive the Middle Ages, only because the emperor was mistakenly believed to be the Christian Constantine. Here Rome speaks to us in the language of the Renaissance. This is the perfect balance between ancient power and human reason. The 3 palaces surrounding us, the senators, the conservators, and the new palace, create a sense of protection and triumph at the same time. There is no fairground bustle here or fast food that we saw below. We begin our descent along Monte Tarpeo, a road that literally hangs over the past. On the right, the harsh wall of the Capitoline Hill, and on the left opens perhaps the most honest view of the Roman Forum. There are no ceremonial facades here, only the exposed skeleton of the empire, the foundations of basilicas, fragments of columns, and a silence that feels denser than air. This descent is like a slow immersion into centuries. The roar of modern Piazza Venezia remained somewhere behind the hill's wall, and here time flows differently. We descend along Via di San Teodoro, and to our left rises a wall that once was the center of world governance. This is the Palatine Hill, and everything you see above is a solid mass of imperial power. These brick arcades on the left are only foundations, supports for that unthinkable elegance and pomp that once reigned above. This path along the base of the Palatine, the best place in Rome to grasp the scale of the distance between an ordinary mortal on the road and those who lived up there, among marble and gold. We burst out into the open space of the great circus, Circus Maximus, where just moments ago we were squeezed by the wall of the Palatine and Capitoline, now opens a gigantic bowl 600 meters long. This is the largest public space of antiquity, capable of holding 250,000 spectators, a quarter of the population of Rome at the time. Look at this distance. Right now, it is a vast green hollow, but 2,000 years ago, there was an unceasing roar. This was a place of pure adrenaline, chariot races, reckless bets, and crowd fury. To the left above us, the imperial palaces still rise. From there, from the height of the Palatine, Roman rulers watched the spectacles from their boxes, literally without leaving home. Today, silence reigns here, and only the scale of this field allows us to grasp how enormous the demands of the Roman public were. This is an ideal point to catch your breath after the narrow streets of the center and see how Rome knows how to turn its loudest triumphs into endless, sun-flooded space. We reach the final strait. Ahead is the main postcard of the world, the Colosseum, a huge stone maw that for centuries chewed fear and rage to spit them out as imperial grandeur. To the left, at the very foot of the Palatine, rises the triumphal arch of Constantine. This is a grand collage of fragments of former glory. If you look closely at the reliefs, you can notice a strange thing. They are all of different styles. Constantine was in such a hurry to build the arch that his craftsmen simply removed decorations from monuments of great emperors of the past, Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. This is a kind of ancient Photoshop, an attempt by Constantine to place himself in one line with the best rulers in history. On the arch, it is clearly visible how craftsmanship had degraded. Fine work of Trajan's era here stands next to crude, flat figures from Constantine's own time, which look as if they were carved by a schoolchild in shop class. The largest triumphal arch of Rome is just a very expensive exhibition of other people's achievements. A great empire at sunset could no longer create anything of its own, so it simply pasted its name onto others' successes. An ironic ending before finally slipping into history. Once legions marched here with stolen goods and captives, and today we roll over the same stones of the sacred road, Via Sacra. Our route has become a true cross-section of Roman history. We began with the engineering triumphs of the Porta Maggiore aqueducts, passed through stolen gold of great basilicas, the absurdity of the Trevi Fountain, and the strict geometry of Prati. We looked into the very heart of the city, from the harsh geometry of antiquity to excessive madness of the Baroque and the cold concrete of modernity. And here it is, the final of our path, the Colosseum. This skeleton of empire no longer frightens. It does not inspire awe. It only reminds us that any will to power ends like this. Weathered stone, holes in the walls, and the indifferent noise of the modern city around. Without marble cladding, it has exposed its essence. A conveyor for death and crowd control.